Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? He's done a really great job. I'm impressed.
Did you expect anything else?
Oh, look here. Pansy, honey.
Oh, nice.
Frank, Cassie.
Hey.
Welcome to Seed Time Garden Supplies, partners.
Come here. Oh,
Closer to the sword, closer to God.
Ray looks amazing.
it really does. We were gonna bring a grand opening gift, but my go-to is usually a plant.
Dolores, I want you to meet Frank and Cassie Donovan. They made this whole thing happen.
Oh, we helped. A little bit. Ray's the one with the green thumb. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Well, actually, I think we met some time ago down at the soup kitchen.
That's right. You haven't been there in a while.
Well, I haven't had the need lately. Thanks to Ray here.
You know, you should come out to the banquet tonight. You could be Ray's +1.
Oh, she wouldn't want to sit through some old stuffy banquet with a bunch of rich folk.
I can decide if I want to go to some stuffy banquet myself. Thank you very much.
It's not stuffy. What? Okay, so it's a little stuffy. What do you expect? It's for the soup kitchen donors. You've got a better idea. You do, don't you?
He also said to the man who invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, don't just invite your friends and relatives and rich neighbors, the kind of people who can return the favor. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you'll be blessed because they can't repay you.
It does kind of make sense to invite the people that benefits, right?
So basically it's like a metal detector, but only it finds plastic. You know what I'm saying?
But what would you find with it?
What do you mean? Plastic?
I met Frank almost 4 years ago at the kitchen. Yeah.
Excuse me, I have some people for you to meet.
This is Thomas and his fiancée, Julia. We've enjoyed getting to know them at the kitchen.
It's great to meet you, Thomas.
Yeah, you too.
Oh, I'm sort of the official handshaker for us.
I am so sorry.
It's okay. I saved tons of money on hand sanitizer. I'll be right back.
Cassie, may I speak with you for a moment, please?
Oh, Victoria, I'd like to...
I'm sorry, dear. I'm afraid I won't be able to stay for dinner, but you can put me down for my usual donation.
Oh, thank you. But I'm sorry that you have to leave so soon.
I'm not exactly sure why things were changed this year, but you should probably know that a few people feel a little ambushed by how this was done.
Ambushed?
I just thought you'd want to know.
Aren't you staying for dinner?
Not for me.
I'm sorry to hear that. Did we do something to upset you?
I don't see no name card says Chuck.
That's a good point, Chuck. But I don't see a card here with anyone else's name on it here, do you?
No, sir, I suppose I don't.
Chuck, from the looks of it, we are going to have plenty of food to go around. So, would you please join me for dinner?
Hey, Frank, Cassie, thank you. It was a great evening. Y'all take care.
Take care. Drive safe.
What a lovely evening.
Yeah.
Something wrong, Frank?
I was just thinking about the people who left earlier tonight. But hey, more food for us, right?
You know, some people only want to sit at tables when every seat is reserved for people like themselves. But you want real community. You gotta rip up name cards. And prepare to get your hands dirty. I know a thing or two about getting my hands dirty.
Now you know why we hated to lose Ray as a gardener.
Oh, yeah.
Julia, is something wrong, dear?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm sorry.
Say what's on your mind. You're among friends here.
It's just I haven't been a part of many meaningful relationships lately. Except Thomas, of course. Thomas is about the only healthy thing in my life.
It's okay, sweetheart. Julia lost her apartment today. It's a long story, but we're trying to figure out how to deal with some people who think that they get to decide what table Julia sits at.
Oh.
I know that there's a lot there that won't be solved right now, but Frank and I might be able to help out in some small way. We have a guest house that we would love for you to use for as long as you need it.
No, I couldn't.
No, thank you, Mrs. Donovan, but...
No, hold on, Thomas. I know you can't see my wife right now, but if you could, you'd know not to mess with her. But seriously, we insist.
I don't know what to say.
Say thank you, dear.
Of course. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, it's settled then.
See this all over.
This was nice, Ray.
Yeah. Especially knowing God will repay you. So I don't have to.
In this series, we're talking about going beyond just transactional generosity, where we transfer some of our resources, some of our wealth, some of our money to help other people, to really engaging with people in relational generosity. The passage that Ray referred to when he was talking to Cassie and Frank there in his garden store is taken from Luke chapter 14, where Jesus is talking to some Pharisees about how to show true godliness in their lives rather than their religious piety. It says in Luke chapter 14, verse 1, if you want to follow along, it's on the screen. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to share a meal in the home of one of the leaders of the Pharisees, they were watching him closely. Why do you think they were watching him closely? They wanted to catch him doing something that they could pounce upon. A man suffering from an abnormal swelling of the body was there. Jesus asked the lawyers and Pharisees, "Does the law allow healing on the Sabbath or not?" But they said nothing. Jesus took hold of the sick man, cured him, and then let him go. And he said to them, "Suppose your child or ox fell into a ditch on the Sabbath day, wouldn't you immediately pull it out?" But they had no response. In this part of the passage, Jesus is talking about having basic care and compassion for people and letting that guide how you use something like the Sabbath that God has given us for our benefit. Then he goes on to teach another lesson. It says in verse 7, when Jesus noticed how the guests sought out the best seats at the table, he told them a parable. He's there at dinner in this Pharisee's house, and he sees how everybody's trying to get the prime seats around the table. So Jesus says this, when someone invites you to a wedding celebration, don't take your seat in the place of honor. Someone more highly regarded than you could have been invited by your host. The host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give your seat to this other person. Embarrassed, you will take your seat in the least important place. Instead, when you receive an invitation, go and sit in the least important place. When your host approaches you, he will say, "Friend, move on up here to a better seat." And then you will be honored in the presence of all your fellow guests. All who lift themselves up will be brought low, and those who make themselves low will be lifted up. Jesus is talking about going through our lives, not trying to put ourselves front and center, but there's nothing wrong with having self-confidence, but having a humility about ourselves that allows others to be placed before us, if it happens that way. And then Jesus comes to the part that Ray talks about there in the garden store. Then Jesus said to the person who had invited him, "When you host a lunch or dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers and sisters, your relatives, or rich neighbors. If you do, they will invite you in return, and that will be your reward. Instead, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed because they can't repay you. Instead, you will be repaid when the just are resurrected." Now, Jesus is not saying here, it's wrong, you should never have dinner for family and friends. Of course not. He's not saying that you shouldn't have special occasions where you invite your family for celebrations and so on. But he's saying, in the course of our lives, that should not be the only thing that we do. There should be times when we try to reach out to those who aren't in our normal circle of friendships. Reach out to people who are in need of some relational generosity. And so Ray suggests, hey, we're having a dinner to raise funds for the soup kitchen. You know, it might not be a bad idea to have some of the folks who we're going to serve in that soup kitchen, who are going to benefit from it, to come to the dinner. You know, one of the things I like about hosting the Cherry Street Mission annual supporters banquet here in this room right here. We've done it 2 or 3 years now. And they have a lovely dinner, and a lot of the work is done by some of the clients, the people that they serve at Cherry Street. And we interact with them throughout the day, and then they sit at the tables with others who come from throughout the greater Toledo area, who are part of the funding support for Cherry Street. I think that's great that the guests, they call them, that Cherry Street is there to serve, also gets to sit down and eat with those who provide the funds. That's what Ray is talking about here. Moving beyond just writing a check and instead picking up the ladle and serving, or inviting someone to the table. In Proverbs 19:17 it says, "He who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord." Now when you stop and think about that for a minute, that doesn't make sense. God has everything. Who needs to lend anything to the Lord? When you're doing something for the poor, it says, God sees that as a gift. You're lending to him. And that verse goes on to say, and he will repay him for his deed. And that's what Ray is saying when he tells Frank at the end of the video, I don't need to repay you. The Lord will repay you. That is relational generosity. That's what we want to focus on. Relational generosity is not just sharing with others, but caring for others. It's moving beyond simply feeling like we've done all that we need to do because we've given money out of our pocket or we've mailed in a check. It's seeing what we can do to become involved in the lives of the people that God puts in our circle of interaction or influence. It says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, you're familiar with this as the love chapter. The introduction to that chapter on what love is really like says this. It says, if I could speak all the languages of earth and of angels, but didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. In other words, I could have all that eloquence and just be sounding like a clanging cymbal. But didn't love others. That's talking about relational generosity. Love only exists, you know, in the context of two or more people interconnecting in some kind of relational way. I guess you can love yourself. In fact, you know, Jesus tells us to love others as we love ourselves. But if all you ever do, Jesus says, is love yourself, then you're going to be a very poor person. We miss the point of life. If I do that but don't love others, I would only be making noise. Secondly, it says, if I had the gift of prophecy, and if I understood all of God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains, but didn't love others, I would be what? What's it say? I would be nothing. I could have all this knowledge, all this wisdom. I would know the mind of God, but if I was not showing the heart of God, if I didn't love others, I would be nothing. We are immensely impoverished when love is restricted to ourselves or just our close circle of family or friends. And then in the third statement, the Apostle Paul writing there in 1 Corinthians 13 says, if I gave everything that I have to the poor and even sacrificed my own body, I could boast about it, but if I didn't love others, I would have gained what? Nothing. With giving, with generosity, there needs to be caring and compassion. There needs to be love. Transactional generosity, where we take what we have and we give some of it away, or even all of it, that is good. That is important. It is a necessary part of living generously. But Paul is saying here, there has to be another component with the giving element in our lives, and that is the component of love for the other person. Transactional generosity is to be combined with relational generosity. There's a story from the Old Testament that beautifully illustrates the bringing together of these two things, the giving and the loving. If you've been using your Daily Companion Bible this week, you would have come across this story on the second day of reading. Does anybody know what the theme for the reading this week was? Anybody? Please help me here. Nobody using this besides me? Generosity, that's close. Generosity is the theme for week 37. And wouldn't you know it, this is the week that we start into our Loving Generously series. We didn't plan it that way, but God planned it that way. Gratitude, sugar, you're a week ahead. That starts tomorrow. That's week 38. Week 37, generosity. And here's the story from the second day reading. It's from 2 Samuel chapter 9. It's about King David now. David has started out as the shepherd boy who came as a lad and met his brothers on the battlefield, faced Goliath, and with God's help killed the giant. He became one of the servants in King Saul's court. He served the king with his music. He was proficient on playing musical instruments and singing, and it soothed King Saul. But as David grew into a man, he became a valiant soldier, and he was able to lead the Israelite armies in victories, and his fame surpassed King Saul, and Saul got jealous. became angry, and even sought to take David's life, and David had to flee. David had a close relationship, though, with King Saul's son, Jonathan. They were such good friends as boys. They grew up together, and they developed a bond of friendship. Both King Saul and his son, Jonathan, were killed in battle, and David became the king. The story here in 2 Samuel chapter 9 happens a number of years later when the kingdom is solidified, everything is stable. And David has a thought one day, and here's what his thought is. David asked, "Is there anyone from Saul's family still alive that I could show faithful love for Jonathan's sake?" In other words, I miss my friend Jonathan. Is there anybody from his family, from King Saul's family, that I could show the love that I have for Jonathan to this person? There was a servant from Saul's household named Ziba, and he was summoned before David. "Are you Ziba?" the king asked. "At your service," he answered. The king asked, "Is there anyone left from Saul's family that I could show God's kindness to?" "Yes," Ziba said to the king, "one of Jonathan's sons, whose feet are crippled." Now that detail is added to let us know that he is a lame person. And in that day and time, there was practically nothing a lame person could do to earn a living for himself. He was dependent upon others. "Where is he?" the king asked. "He is at the house of Amiel's son. How do you pronounce that, Blake? Maker at Lodabar." It's a mouthful right there. "Amiel's son, Maker at Lodabar," Ziba told the king. So King David had him brought. Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. Can y'all say Mephibosheth? Say that with me. Mephibosheth. Don't ever forget that name. Mephibosheth. Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson came to David, and he fell to the ground, bowing low out of respect. "Mephibosheth," David said. "Yes," he replied, "I am at your service." "Don't be afraid," David told him. You know, for all Mephibosheth knew, he was being summoned maybe for David to take revenge on all that Saul tried to do to him. David says, No, don't be afraid, because I will certainly show you what? Faithful love for the sake of your father, Jonathan. I will restore to you all the fields of your grandfather Saul, and you will eat at my table always. Now notice that David is offering Mephibosheth two things here. All the fields that had belonged to Saul, which would probably cover many, many miles, that he had as the king. And I'm assuming those were probably now considered to be King David's possession. David is saying all those fields that belonged to your grandfather Saul, they're going to be yours. That's a gift of great value transferred to him. That's transactional generosity. But then David says this to him. He says, you will eat at my table from now on. David is welcoming Mephibosheth into his own household. He will be treated like one of David's own family members. That's an expression of relational generosity. Loving generously. Are you with me? See what David is doing here? Verse 8, Mephibosheth bowed low out of respect, and he said, who am I, your servant, that you should care about a dead dog like me? In other words, he says, I'm worthless. Why do you care? I'm insignificant in your kingdom. David summoned Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, I have given your master's grandson everything belonging to Saul and his family. You will work the land for him. you, your sons, and your servants. He had been King Saul's servant. Now he's going to be Mephibosheth's servant. And you will bring into your master's house, and you will bring food into your master's house for them to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, will always be at my table. And then the scripture adds this in parentheses. Now Ziba had 15 sons, wow, and 20 servants. I mean, he had a lot of people working for him. Now, all those 15 and 20, 35 people are going to be working for Mephibosheth, but they are going to benefit too. Ziba and his sons are going to share in the prosperity of all these fields that will be worked and harvested. This generosity of David is rippling out to more and more people. Verse 11, then Ziba said to the king, your servant will do whatever my master the king commands. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's own sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah. That detail is added to let us know that it's going to be passed on to another generation who will inherit what Mephibosheth gets. All who lived in Ziba's household became Mephibosheth's servants. Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate where? At the king's table. And it says he was crippled in both feet. And Jesus says, when you have a dinner, don't just invite your family and friends. Invite the poor. Invite the lame, the cripple. We're talking about learning a lifestyle of generosity. Both transactional generosity, being able to give, but relational generosity, developing relationships with people that need to have that kind of love shown to them. I hesitate to illustrate with examples from my own life, but if you'll indulge me, I'd like to share a couple stories as we close. One will be an example I feel good about, and one, as you will understand, I don't feel good about at all. When Judy and I were in our first church assignment, I was an associate pastor in Cincinnati, and we were given an apartment to live at there as an associate. The senior pastor lived in the parsonage. And in the apartment building that we lived in, there was a family on the first floor. It was a second marriage for both of them. The mother had an older daughter, and then together they had a son. Frankie was his name. He was a riot. He was so funny. He was like 3 or 4 when we met him, and he was always saying and doing really goofy things. His older sister, Marlene, was in elementary school, and while we were at the apartment, we got to know them well, and Judy particularly took an interest in them because, unfortunately, their mother was an alcoholic and did not really give a lot of parental care and guidance to either one of the children. Most of the day, they just were running around the apartment complex playing on their own. So Judy engaged with them and got to know them. Well, the church decided that they wanted to provide a house for us to live in, so they rented another house that we moved into. When we were leaving the apartment complex, Judy was concerned about what was going to happen to Marlene. She was going into junior high years now. Judy was a school teacher at the time. She had observed that Marlene missed a lot of school. She just had a burden on her heart that we needed to do something for Marlene. We weren't going to be there at the apartment anymore. So we talked about it, and we asked Marlene's mother and her stepdad if it would be all right if Marlene came and lived with us that next year. It was like her 7th or 8th grade year in junior high. And we explained we just wanted to, provide a good environment for her to flourish in her studies and all. And they were willing to do that. So for a year or two, I can't remember how many years it was, Marlene lived with us. That wasn't always easy. She was a challenge. But we felt like it was the thing to do, to to see if we can make an impact on her life. That's an example of relational generosity. We didn't have a lot of income to share transactionally, but we had a home to share with her. The other example just happened this week, and I'm ashamed to have to talk about this. But during the week, I think it was on Thursday, Julie came into the office, and I was working on previewing the Loving Generously videos and getting the message ready, and I was all immersed in that. Julie said, "I hate to bother you, but there's a lady out here in the office. She needs some help. We told her we don't have any gas cards. We don't have any grocery cards. We don't have any funds on hand. Actually, our fund to help needy people is in the hole right now because we've given out more than we've taken in from your donations to supply the pastor's discretionary fund." A lot of times we go ahead and find something to give them, or I pull some money out of my pocket. But for this time, I don't know. I just made up my mind as I led, and Julie said, "We told him we don't have anything, but she wants to see the pastor." So I made up my mind going from my office to the front office that I was going to just politely tell her we don't have anything. So I did. And, we had a little bit of a conversation, and I asked her about her family. She's estranged from all of her family. And I said, where do you live? And she said, "Well, I don't have an address. I live in my van." So she was truly homeless. But I said, "I'm sorry, I wish I could help you. We don't have any gas cards. We don't have any food cards. We're in the hole, really, in our fund." Didn't tell her I had $60 in my pocket I could have given her. But she left, and I went back to my office, and I saw her drive away, and I thought, "Dennis, you dummy. Here you are thinking about loving generously, working on this message, and this lady comes because she expects that here at the church she can get help, and you use a flimsy excuse, we don't have anything." Often we go ahead and give, but this time I didn't. And I wished I could have gone out and quickly enough to catch her, because I should have shown generosity, shouldn't I? Nod your head. Shame on you, Dennis. Sometimes we wonder in the office, is this person really being honest with us? We get all kinds of stories. When Anna started working here, she couldn't believe how many people do come to the church wanting financial assistance. Can we believe this story? Or are they just trying to take advantage of our generosity? We don't always know. Someone raised this issue with C.S. Lewis one time in a letter that they wrote to him. And this is how he replied in a letter that he wrote back just a short while before his death. He says, "It will not bother me in the hour of death to reflect that I have been, quote, had for a sucker by any number of impostors. But it would be a torment to know that I had refused even one person in need." We can't always determine the truthfulness of the story that people present to us, but they come because they have a need of some sort. And to think that we may turn someone away in a genuine need out of a caution that we may be taking advantage of, we just don't want to go there. It says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, "If I gave everything I have to the poor and even sacrificed my body, I could boast about it, but if I didn't love others, I would have gained nothing." So in this series, we want to be learning about how to find that, going back to our last series, rhythm of life, living, loving generously, because we follow Christ. And that is his nature. That is his character. And he shows us the character of God. Let's let Ray sum it up for us as we close.
When I was homeless, there wasn't a table in the world with my name on it. In the time when I most needed community, I was uninvited and unwelcome because everyone was uncomfortable at the sight of the pain and poverty and need in my life. That's when I first heard Jesus' words, "When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends, brothers, relatives, or rich neighbors, but invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind." We all do it, rich or poor. We all look for people who can serve our needs, rather than looking for people whose needs we can serve. But what if Jesus really meant what he said? What if he really wants us to spend less time seeking those we can benefit from, and more time seeking those we can be a benefit to? Frank and Cassie learned a long time ago that generosity is not just about picking up a pen and writing a check. It's about picking up a ladle and serving your fellow man. Just as Jesus humbled himself to be with us, we're called to reenact that same journey, to humble ourselves and to invite those the world rejects to our table. Then we can move beyond transactional generosity into relational generosity, giving our relational capital to those who cannot repay us. But the beautiful thing is, when you do this, God says that he himself will repay you. That's not a bad IOU to have. Now, you may not invite the entire homeless shelter over to your kid's next birthday party. But the point is to examine your heart and to ask yourself, who are you inviting into your life? Are you including only those who can repay you through connections, social status, or opportunities? Or are you including in your life the poor, the lame, and the blind, those who have nothing to offer but their needs? Maybe it's time to rip up the name cards in your life and reach out to someone with no place to sit, and rejoice if you find that they have no way to repay you, because God says you will be blessed. So, who can you invite to your table today?
That's a good question. Would you pray with me, please? God, as we consider this message and look at how it can apply to our lives, give us open hearts and minds to be willing to extend the limits, the boundaries of our love, to include more people, to be willing to share the resources that you have so abundantly put into our lives. Guide us in this, we pray, in Christ's name, amen. Would you stand, please? A couple things I want to tell you about.